Hey folks, and welcome to the Daily Ratings Podcast. It's a show where each week we sit down with Vincent Daly to get his thoughts on the latest movies he's been watching, both older films and new releases. And don't worry, there's no spoilers. Vince will give a brief review of the movie, share some thoughts, and of course, then rate the film. The daily ratings are always fair, honest, and most importantly, they're consistent. On today's show, Vince will be rating and reviewing Hard 8, Boogie Nights, Magnolia, Punch Drunk Love, and newly released Licorice Pizza, all directed by Paul Thomas Anderson. So stay tuned and enjoy the show. Mr. Vincent Daly, how we doing, buddy?
How's it going, Tubby boy?
It's going real well. How was your Paul Thomas Anderson week?
Good. I'm glad that we could keep this kind of focus. Of course, I'm a huge fan of some of the later work of Paul Thomas Anderson, but honestly, a lot of these movies I've never seen before. So
yeah, it's cool that you went through his early work.
Exactly, and I think Licorice Pizza very much billed to be a return or revival of his romance-driven or his kind of relationship-driven stories. So very excited to talk about some of these movies, and as always, I love tracking the development of a director and their styles over time. So seeing, so many films in such a short sequence of years, all together, clustered together, really cool to see how it all develops.
Yeah, between Hard 8 and Punch Drunk Love, it's only 96 to 2002. Mm-hmm. And, that's kind of cool that you notice that his latest, Licorice Pizza, kind of takes a return to his old school kind of format.
Yeah.
Because in between 2002 Punch Drunk Love and Licorice Pizza, which 2021, you were getting movies much different than what Licorice Pizza is, and then his older stuff like
Boogie Nights or something like that.
The ones in between,
like There'll Be Blood, The Master, Phantom Thread.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It's cool that he's kind of taking a return to kind of what his roots a little bit, I guess.
Yeah, and honestly, what I've loved about Paul Thomas, There'll Be Blood is really a masterpiece.
Yeah.
So seeing him develop maybe some of those styles that are taken to stylistically kind of a different angle, especially for films like The Master and There'll Be Blood, is so different than the films that he has in his earlier career. I like watching these, and again, above all else, I like doing my homework on if this is supposed to be a revival of that in his stylings, then I want to see what the source material is.
Yeah, and was that something that you picked up on with watching his films, or was that noted before that he took it was very purposely done, and it was his choice to go back to an old school kind of format or his ways?
I think it was a little bit in the marketing, and again, more than anything, was driven by that I probably haven't seen. Maybe one on this film I've taken a look at before, but really haven't done a critical dive into these. So I said, hey, that is perfect ammunition to dive into for the podcast.
I can't wait to see how your week went. I hope I'm interested to see how these all turned out.
How it all shakes out.
But let's start with the first one, and it's going to be Hard 8 in 1996. And what do we have for an early Paul Thomas Anderson?
Okay, so this is first film out of the gate. Hard 8 is a movie about a benefactor, a man that is very generous, very giving to a few characters in the life around Reno and a casino type of living. This is a movie that, as far as first movies go, pretty damn good cast. We have John C. Reilly, Sam Jackson, Gwyneth Paltrow, and in my research, this was described as kind of a wannabe Tarantino. And I think that's off base for a few reasons. These are the type of moments that I've really been enjoying researching and reviewing for the podcast, because when I find a movie is off base from when I was originally recommended it or in research online, the chatter around a movie, if I find a different conclusion to that, I'm really excited to talk about it for that reason. And this was definitely hit the nail on that area.
So was Hard Eight being compared to, was it being compared to early Tarantino, or just like after the fact now, like in today's standard, people are saying that Hard Eight reminds us just as a normal Tarantino? Because Tarantino's earlier in the 90 films are much different than what they are now, too.
Yeah.
So was there a comparison between, like, early Paul Thomas Anderson and early Tarantino very close?
Yeah. I think it's the look of the film. It's the importance of music. I think in 96 specifically, this movie gets lost among Casino and Pulp Fiction in how it feels and how slick it is in that very 90s, music, fast-paced driven type of film that I think for a lot of viewers, you would probably describe it as a Scorsese type. Honestly, it is all over the 90s, these type of films. I think for today's watching, while it doesn't maybe get lost in those comparisons, because Hard Eight is a very different film than its comparisons of the time, despite its feel, I think it gets lost today more so on just being a little bit too straightforward and simple of a story. It wasn't really anything I felt, you gotta make time to watch this. It was decent, and we'll obviously go into what it's primarily about is the performances at hand here.
Okay.
So, but that's where I'm coming in with this review, that I don't find there's too much of an overwhelming reason in today's climate to say, you got to go back and watch Hard Eight, whereas with those comparisons to Tarantino, Scorsese work, Casino and Pulp Fiction specifically as contemporaries, those I would say are very much something you should always be circling back for your watch list. So.
Okay, interesting. So like Hard Eight ended up just being too one note and not. Was it lacking a fantasticalness to it, or was just lacking something? It was lacking a depth or something like that.
It's very quickly paced. It's very slick. The music is a big focus here. I think it's
the story itself not that
it's
great.
The story itself, and it's a little bit over a main character, Philip Baker Hall, which honestly, he is all over these movies that we're talking about today.
Yeah.
Haven't really seen him in much stuff outside of this, so it was kind of fun to see him popping up in each of these watches throughout the week. He's our main focus here, and despite a star-studded cast, he is really, really our main character. So much importance is put on his routine, on his expertise, and his generosity as a character. Part of my problem with it is he plays almost a flawlessly good character, and throughout the entire film, you're looking for speckles of bad, or you're looking for some sort of perspective on why are we following him? Why is this? Where's this generosity coming from? And eventually, the film gives that to you, but it's a little too one note. And I'm talking for the entirety of the runtime of the film, we're not given any reason to be really interested in the character other than he's incredibly generous to the people in hardship around him. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and so in that way, it's also when a character's so straightforward like that, whether they're completely bad or just completely good, it's the gray that makes it interesting.
Exactly.
Makes a character interesting and almost like relatable too.
You got to have that marbling. You got to have that speckle of good and bad. That's good character writing with it,
and very much more realistic as well.
Exactly.
As far as just natural human nature goes, kind of. Okay,
yeah.
so he's lacking just a morally gray character.
Yeah,
for most of the film.
He's flawlessly good, and eventually the film does get into, especially in the third act, why he is acting in his way, and we finally get explanation about it. But there are even solo moments that he's on screen that nothing is given to it, and it's just a hard hook. I had a hard time wondering why we were so invested in this character, other than him doing very generous things for the people around him. Like I said, my main criticism there is that if you're going to write a character, or rather more importantly, good character writing, is that that speckle, that marbling of, a good character can't be fully good. There has to be something to bring him in the middle, something more relatable, something to bring them down a tiny bit. Just in the same way that a good villain writing, you have to probably have something reasonable to their mustache twirling,
right,
to create some depth there. So
okay,
when it comes to everyone else, I think everyone else is doing a passable job. Sam Jackson is definitely a standout here. He's given a lot of cool moments on screen.
Okay, I wonder if that's why people it's just like, oh, classic Tarantino or something like that, just because you get Sam Jackson in there.
The casino vibe, the music, certainly, that's where those comparisons come from, for sure. And credit to, obviously, Sam Jackson's agent, because they knew how to, maybe not typecast, but certainly play to the feel, of what people wanted.
He sold it well, though, Sam Jackson.
Absolutely.
He's in the right role.
Rule of cool is right here. And he's cool as ice in it. Definitely not a full antagonist. The antagonist of this, or the conflict in this film is a little weak, but Sam Jackson is more of like an agitator. He plays almost part of the slippery slope of how things come about in this film. A very brief young Philip Seymour Hoffman is also another standout. I mean, we're talking about Philip Baker Hall. Philip Seymour Hoffman is all over these films, and that was probably one of the most enjoyable aspects of going back to these films, because I've seen him in a lot of stuff and a lot of his award-winning work, but this is as close as a director-actor relationship as your De Niro to Scorsese, almost any comparison you can come up with.
Or a Tarantino and a Samuel.
Sure, yeah. Absolutely. So when it comes there, those are really stand-up performances. I think John C. Reilly, as much as I love seeing him on screen, he's also riddled in these movies that we're covering today. Not the best performance. Gwyneth Paltrow as well, not the best. And I think in combination with that, I'm looking more out of these characters here, and it's not that depth is there. It's not that care isn't put behind these character arcs in the film. It's just a little one note, and it comes off a little bit too simple for especially a late 90s film.
So you're really looking more for you're looking more out of the writing. It's not so much the performances that you're taking issue with. It's you wish that the characters just overall from the get-go were given more depth. Is that what you're kind of saying? Okay.
Exactly. And not for nothing, too. Just to briefly go back to Philip Baker Hall with his character. I forget the character's name in the movie. Sidney, it was. There are moments given to solo time on screen that could have easily been backstory, could have easily been a glimpse of why are we following this character. Instead, it's real estate in the film for soundtrack, for cool casino shots. And it's not exactly bad, but it doesn't give the depth that I want out of this story. And for that reason, I mean, that's really kind of what wraps me into this overall feeling, excuse the pun, but for a casino movie, there is very little stakes here. The conflict is just comes a little too late and just a little too straightforward. There's not enough of a hook by the time that the hook comes, and that hook is just way too late. The style of the film is there, and certainly if you are in love with any kind of casino movie as a subject matter, I think the package that this is wrapped up in is a very cool wrapping, but overall this film comes off a bit weak because of how quickly the conflict is resolved and how little insight we give into the characters of why this is the conflict, why are we following them.
Okay.
With that said, we are going to go ahead and give Hard 8 a 49.
Oh, wow, 49, okay.
Middle of the road.
Yeah, so really, not much to... You walked away from this not impressed and not highly disappointed.
No, I lukewarm, just because again it was I don't know. I don't want to say too shallow of experience, but again it just goes back to that.
Yeah, but I think that would sum it up pretty well as well. Yeah. And honestly, it's like, okay, it makes sense. His kind of first film, first big feature film, it kind of makes sense,
Exactly.
Okay, so let's keep it going here. And very surprisingly, like I said, Hard 8 came out in 1996. We're 1 year later, 1997, and that's when we have Boogie Nights comes out.
Wow.
And what do we have with Boogie Nights?
Man, a surprise from me. I loved this film. This is a fairly infamous film for the starting point for Mark Wahlberg. A lot of an ensemble cast. Again, we have John C. Reilly, Philip Seymour Hoffman, Burt Reynolds as a phenomenal role in this, and a lot of usual offenders or usual cast to PTA's films. This is a movie about the porn industry in 1977, and has just, one hell of an opening shot and sequence. The first sequence shows us all of our main characters, pretty much all of them. Damn near close to all the characters we're going to follow. And the film is so strategically set up in that way because we basically get introduced to this family, this ensemble cast, and then we follow them and develop with them over a good 7 years. And it was so strategic. It's really, how I wrap up my feeling with this film is that it knows what it wants to achieve and it executes it so incredibly well.
Wow, okay.
A really, really phenomenal film. And I was almost in disbelief of how I've never seen this film. Of course, I know a little bit. I love
it. I love the fact that you didn't see it and got to watch it fresh eyes for this.
Exactly, and loved it this much,
Yeah,
too.
That's awesome.
It was really a phenomenal time.
So he had you on the hook that first scene.
Oh,
and
yeah.
you were just like, okay, I'm along for the ride.
Exactly.
Take me on it. Yeah.
And it's done in a very Spielberg Warner, Scorsese kind of bar scene introduction. And I think this film gets compared a lot, again, in the midst of that late 90s music-driven, cool look to it. I think where with Hard Eight, that was a perspective to kind of understand how it was being compared at the time. With Boogie Nights, I think, once again, if I can help folks at home navigate these films, that is the wrong way to look at this film. This film is very much about the progression of an ensemble cast throughout 7 years of their life in the porn industry, and it is so much more than just like a Scorsese wannabe, like it's been compared sometimes.
Stands on its own.
Yeah, it stands on its own.
Yeah.
Because it's much more pocket. It's much more family oriented, as much weird as that sound is with the porn industry. So it is really a top-notch experience. I think why I love this film so much is its look, though. It is so damn sharp, so precise in the topic and how it goes about executing that topic of the feel of the porn industry during 77, the progression into VHS coming about and how that changed porn, some historical elements, but most of all, really building some good heart into our characters. We will get into the performances in just a second because it was probably the most mind-blowing part about this film. And I really mean mind-blowing because I do not like Mark Wahlberg. But the rule of cool once again comes up here, and I think it's probably one of the best executed upon in that time period because the subject matter of a messy porn industry in 77 and beyond, up until like 83, it's not really happy material. It's very emotionally heavy, very
sad. It's kind of just a downer.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think as all audience members can watch this film and say, "Oh wow, it's." This is not something I want to be a part of, which is kind of a no-dust statement. But the brilliance of this film is it takes it on the chin with a smile. Everyone is so happy about this very speckled, dirty topic.
Okay.
That it really, it's so well paced, it's so sharp, and the cinematography sells it for that reason as well. These characters are given such a long time on screen just to interact with each other, just to sell the illusion that they're all under, that this is probably the best opportunities of their life. And as the film progresses, as it turns more and more sour for these characters, we really get some top-notch performances. The camera never breaks away. We are given just such long sequences with them.
And one, it's probably a good idea because you have such a large cast and you want to kind of get in depth with all of them. I think that's awesome that he introduces almost everybody right away, like you said.
Exactly.
And it's so funny to hear you say like you said, it's really paced well, and you didn't find yourself checking your watch or anything like that, and you just felt it was good, snappy, and quick. The movie's 2 hours and 35 minutes.
Absolutely, yeah.
So the fact that he was able to fill that time, and maybe it's one of the only. Would you say? I won't put words in your mouth. Would you say you have this 2 hour and 35-minute film, and it's just like, oh, he needed all of that time to get done what he wanted? At least, well, it's apparent that you weren't saying there's fat here to trim.
Yes, no, and I think that's actually a trend with all of his films. We'll get to Magnolia in just a second, but Magnolia is even a meteor film at 3 hours and change.
Yeah, like 3 hours, 8 minutes.
Again, pacing is not one of my critiques, and if anything, a highlight of these films.
It's fantastic.
So, I mean, a breath of fresh air. I feel like, all through, Q3, Q4, I was complaining about, we were talking about, how just in muddy boots, knee deep in it. These movies feel like, pulling teeth.
Right.
It was very refreshing to see across the board. Very well paced.
And one other note, just so the cinematographer Robert Elswit, it seemed like he followed Paul Thomas Anderson a little bit. Like he did There Will Be Blood. He also did things like Nightcrawler. He did do Punch Drunk Love that we'll review later.
Yeah.
He even did King Richard, which we reviewed last week.
Look at that.
So he's kind of all over the place and he's done a number of movies that you would be surprised that he did too. Looking at the list, but I just want to make a note of that because he seems Paul Thomas Anderson also he must have liked him for good reason to keep him around.
Yeah.
And he was around for a little while.
And cinematographers, sometimes it's hard to touch on that because I don't know. I mean, if the script sucks, if the movie sucks, overall, and cinematography can only go so far, but it can just be such an enhanced element. I mean, it really is the visual language of how we're, watching the film and consuming it, consuming the story.
Yeah, it's a good point to make about cinematography because we highlight it sometimes. I wish cinematographers were more highlighted.
I agree.
You know what I mean?
That and editors, too.
And the way that and actually one of your problems with King Richard was that it was a little bit boring as far as the way it was shot and everything like that. The look and style of it, different story, that the actual job of the cinematographer.
Yep.
But all those little things play a role in some sort of way. And it's funny that you say it could make no difference at all or can really help enhance. If a movie's going well and then you have that on top of it, it's funny how you're taking note of it while watching it. But,
and that's shocking with King Richard too, because that definitely was my main criticism with it, just boring portrayal of the main action items.
That's pretty funny.
But I would say Back to Boogie Nights, though. My main critique here is actually the music for some. It's got some cool deep cuts, admittedly, for the time period. All of it stays very focused around 77 to 83 and before, of course, for some of the music cuts.
So does all the music make sense?
All the music makes sense.
There's no 90s songs in there, nothing.
Right,
okay.
no House of Gucci syndrome.
Yeah.
But I will say I do have a little bit of a gut reaction to how much music, just the sheer abundance of it. It feels, and I think I'm ready to label it and eventually revisit the film. It has Forrest Gump syndrome. It's just
not a House of Gucci, but Forrest Gump syndrome.
Right. There's many syndromes out there. many ailments. It's just there is just so much music. Some of it is done and passes my kind of logic test that if it's playing within the universe, if it's actually playing on like a radio or something in the scene, I think that's all right. Some very much feels like let's just try to get the most deep cut possible for 78 and put it in here for this rule of cool. I think it works as a whole. I think as a critique, I cannot throw that against a movie like Forrest Gump and not throw it against Boogie Nights as well.
So it's bugging you a little. It's just like too much of it. Do you think, was it coming? Could somebody watching it, is the idea somewhat just to put you back in that time?
Yeah, but I think that's so shallow. Like, I think it's...
Because lazy. You have brought it up with Forrest Gump, where it seems there's a laziness that it comes across.
Yeah, it's
which
almost
I
like...
don't necessarily disagree.
Yeah, if I'm going to if you're going to put the year on screen, on text, it's going to be at the bottom, why do you need to sell me on this idea of music playing? If anything, it's at that point, it's like, all right, well,
so
duh.
It wasn't feeling provoking? You were just like, when a song kicks on, like to start a scene off, to get you in a mood or something like that, where House of Gucci kind of dropped the ball on that. Was it working on that level, where it's just like getting you ready for this quick scene or this snappy scene
a
coming
little
up?
bit, because like I said, there are some serious deep cuts. I mean, it's kind of a very cool soundtrack for how much it's not the usual affair of this type of music. But like I said, I mean, if there's going to be a line that blurs with calling this a very music-driven late 90s film, a Scorsese type, a Tarantino type, this film doesn't escape that just because the music is just so much. I mean,
it's a lot, huh?
Scenes go from song to song to song. And
it's very much our complaint with Cruella.
Yeah, if I want to be even more savage, it's complete with Suicide Squad. You know?
Oh, yeah.
First one, that is. The OG.
Yeah, it's a different story.
Yeah. But that's overall where the critique lies, is just I feel like the soundtrack was a little heavy-handed, and especially when the small areas where the score actually steps in and it's selling the idea of, wow, these people think this is the best thing that's happened to them, but it's a very soured, very terrible reality that they actually live in. It's such a standout. I would just want it toned back a little bit. That's
okay.
pretty
I think
much
that's
where
a
the
fair
criticism lies. But Mark Wahlberg, how is he this good?
He's good in things. We're gonna have to give him more of a watch.
We are. He is phenomenal. The whole cast as this ensemble, dysfunctional, pornographic family, it works so surprisingly well. Almost comes off in the same type of heartwarming way that early Wes Anderson works almost work. No one is really a huge standout. Everyone's doing a great job, and it works together because they are working together as this kind of family unit. And yeah, they parts of it they separate. They have their own interests in their lives, but the way the film follows the same cast, the same faces that are introduced in that opening sequence over about 7-year period, it just evolves so well and so expertly paced for that reason.
Just a question. So it follows a 7-year period. Were they aging the characters through makeup at all, or seven years enough time where you didn't really notice? Because you had some young characters, like
definitely
a young
Mark
Wahlberg.
Wahlberg. But it was related more so with kind of their descent, not necessarily aging. Obviously there's got to be drugs involved,
right?
And,
so there was a conscious physical difference as the movie progressed.
I think so.
Okay, I was just something I was thinking of.
I would maybe want to go back and check that. I don't know if it was that intense, but I think what balances here is when I think of Burt Reynolds' character, who's old already. There wasn't a huge effort to make him look even older or anything.
Right.
That.
But Mark Wahlberg was 7 years. It's good that you weren't sitting there and being just like, "Oh, still looking pretty good for 7 years later, Mark." Right. At least you weren't saying that, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Definitely wasn't anything that detracted from the movie. But where I want to wrap up with this, though, I mean, I think this movie could very, very easily be overlooked as that soundtrack-driven 90s film trying to capture that energy that was in that time period in a lot of films. But Boogie Nights has some serious heart to it and tells more of a day in the life story rather than criminals have it coming to them type of story that is so explored in these late 90s films, and where the comparisons to this film would be drawn at the time, and I think currently as well. It is so much better for that reason, and much how I said with the perspective for Hard 8 that there's in the present day, not too much of a reason to return to this film. There's not, you don't really have to race to watch it. This film absolutely earns that, to say this stands on its own and is damn good for it as well.
Awesome.
Take that wrapped up in a just an excellently shot film, and you have a must watch from me.
Ooh.
We are going to go ahead and give Boogie Nights a big boy alert, an 85.
All right.
It was phenomenal.
Wow.
And again, just shocked. I have not seen this before. It was. I saw Mark Wahlberg,
Yes,
and I avoided it.
Stay away.
And I was wrong.
And everybody knows, Boogie Nights. Everyone's like heard like callback suit and everything like that. Wow. Yeah, I'm shocked you haven't seen it. I'm shocked it's an 85. That's awesome. That's fantastic.
So much of a fun watch. Obviously very raunchy, but maybe not something you sit down with your parents.
Right.
But
what a turnaround, by the way, too. Like again, 1 year. Hard Eight came out in '96. Boogie Nights came out in '97, and just to have like these very, very different films. That's awesome. That's awesome.
And if there's going to be anything in the establishing DNA, it's in the look of his films. The look of his films are extremely sharp. He knows the type of feel he wants to portray on screen.
Right.
Which is fantastic.
Okay, that's awesome. And again, we're still in the '90s. We're jumping 2 years ahead.
We're stuck in the '90s.
I know. 1999, like we said, it's a 3-hour. 8-minute film, and this is Magnolia.
Magnolia. Okay, so Magnolia, I wasn't, to be honest, I was a little scared to jump into because I watched these out of order, and at this point, I watched Magnolia after one I didn't exactly care for, which we'll get to in a moment, and this is very much billed as PTA's epic. I don't know if that's a great way to describe it. Once again, I think if there's a theme for helping you folks at home navigate this is that a lot of the buzz online for Paul Thomas Anderson's early work, I think, is off base. Some things are better than as described. Some things are worse. I think Magnolia fits into a very unique work in his filmography. This is a film about extraordinary chance, and that kind of mounts into unlikely conditions, unlikely outcomes, and is told right in the opening scenario. This film has kind of a pocket scenario that it opens up with and sells the idea. When I was first watching this, I don't know if I still 100% agree with my initial gut feeling on this, but I would almost categorize this, for you, Tom, kind of a Cloud Atlas-like, that there's obviously way before Cloud Atlas.
Right.
It's this kind of growing storylines tying into storylines. They weave. It's not as done as bombastic as Cloud Atlas, where it's lifetimes.
And you don't have to watch it 2, 3, 4, 5 times to really get it.
I still think you and I are the only people that like that film. I have no shame about it either. Yeah.
But that sense of that constant, it's talk about a moving movie.
Exactly.
It's on the go.
Very interwoven.
Would you say pay attention?
Yeah, I guess, because it honestly the fun of not the fun, but the enjoyment of this film is unraveling and tying to where people can be connected. And a very large cast. I mean, we probably have a good ensemble of 10, I would call, main characters in this.
And in some sort of way, you have interwoven stories connecting at certain parts.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Which makes sense that, so it's over 3 hours because you need to have all these stories have their due, basically.
Exactly. So, as far as the connections together in the how they're interwoven, how you're unraveling that as an audience member, that's the whole point of the film. And again, if I would say, especially before you dive into a 3-hour affair, it right in the beginning, it gives you kind of a pocket scenario of what is going to be sold over the feel of the movie, over the runtime of it. If you give it a chance and you're not digging that first thing, that's your note to kind of step out of this film. For me, it was enjoyable. Standout segments and roles. I mean, the roles are all interwoven. Almost everyone eventually crosses tracks with each other. But very early on, that's where I was getting those Cloud Atlas vibes, that it was these segments of they're dedicated to them. Those standouts are Philip Seymour Hoffman, probably, man, I would have to put maybe a tiny bit more thought into it, but probably my favorite out of all these, just because he's so real. He just almost uncannily feels like just like a real ass person. Like I don't know how
Seymour Hoffman, you're saying?
Yeah, I don't know how he does it.
He's very good at that.
He really is, and he's not afraid to make himself look like an idiot. Quickly going back to Boogie Nights. He plays like a kind of a weird, deplorable character in the porn industry, but like he's totally fine doing it. Like, and he sells it so well.
That's awesome.
Such a a shame we lost him as an actor. But another one, William H. Macy, really awesome segment of a kind of a washed-up game show contestant, child star, and just very entertaining. Other performances I think are good. Nothing I'm too in love with. Tom Cruise.
I mean, I was going to say, okay.
Yeah.
How was Tom Cruise? How was Mr. Cruise?
How's Cruise doing? Tom Cruise plays
all his own stunts in the movie, I'm sure.
All his own tears. He plays a very kind of he's like a sociopath, self-help leader that I don't know. It's a little bit flip-floppy because I think while he has the mask of the character on, and before the character gets kind of cracked emotionally, well, I don't like the character in subject matter, he does do a great job. I think he sells a lot of energy on screen.
Okay.
It's when he comes into his emotion, I think, unfortunately, and I'm not trying to be too critical, but I think he's probably the only one out of our whole ensemble cast that I would give maybe a little bit of a thumbs down on.
Oh, okay. All right.
It's just sold with the same over-the-top energy that his character within the character is trying to sell to people.
Yeah.
And it just comes off just so like, oh, okay, he's really hamming it up here, and very Tom Cruise, like just extremely Tom Cruise.
You're actively telling yourself, all right, Tom Cruise, very good, very good. That's not exactly what you want.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. I will say, I mean, there's been a couple things that I wanted to go back with Tom Cruise, so maybe I'll open my eyes a little bit on that. But I would say if there's out of the very large cast, if only one is giving me kind of a thumbs down feeling, I think that's a pretty big win, you know.
For sure, yeah.
Of the juggling act that the film goes through. But for some criticism, once again, soundtrack and score are a bit in conflict. The soundtrack, the score has a really beautiful, consistent, rising build through the whole movie, and creates a backbone, creates a through line that I think honestly is the keystone to why this film is so expertly paced for being 3 hours and change. It's that score that is constant, you know, if there's going to be a matching to the concept of these stories are interwoven, it's because there's this natural building, rising action in the score that is constantly playing throughout the film. Could be a little bit annoying for some. I think for me, it definitely worked.
Okay.
Where it doesn't work is where soundtrack and score are overlapped. You have such a heavy-handed score with its vision, with how it's designed through the film. And then you're just going to have the soundtrack, which, while it's not bad quality, it will often play over in conflict, and it just does not mash well.
Interesting. Okay. That's a good note to make, yeah.
Yeah, it felt in conflict. You have operatic strings rising, and then you have bar tracks playing with lyrics, and then you have people talking over that. It just...
It's a little messy.
It did not mesh well. It was poorly mashed together.
Okay.
And I think it's a shame because I think if I was to blame one of the sides there, it's definitely the soundtrack side, and on its own, the score, I think, is very purposeful. But just definitely something to note because, as always, sound design, I think, is just as important of how this film is shot, how the story is layered.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's the palatability. It's how we're digesting it. So, but yeah, as far as the differences between the storylines, while at first they may seem very disjointed, I mean, we have everything from a game show host tying into the network CEO, tying into his hospice nurse, then tying into his son. You know, it's very... The distance between them is very far, but this film does a wonderful dance. And again, I think what was so shocking is that it's a 3-hour-plus film. I feel it's expertly paced.
Wow.
Part of the reason of that is it keeps audience members, at least it kept me, preoccupied with constantly unraveling and trying to make these mental connections of how things can tie together was very game-like in that way. And I really enjoyed it for that reason.
It's an impressive thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably the best thing about these type of films. I won't say Cloud Atlas like because this obviously predates that, you know.
Of course.
But and I, you know, maybe that's something that we dive into on the podcast as far as an exploration of what's the source of this type of storytelling. Who did it first, basically. Either way, I'm a fan of the unraveling that happens.
Okay.
There's definitely enjoyment here. I would say again, you know, for a meaty film, that's pretty impressive. That I wasn't watching the clock. You know, I was always but always invested with what was going on there. So I think new scenes are presented, new information is presented quickly enough to keep it snappy, to engage the watcher, and as you know, the film, you know, snowballs into more and more unlikely circumstances. You're there along the way to track it back of how we got there and how, you know, once again, it kind of mounts from chance to unlikely outcomes. We're going to go ahead and give Magnolia a 72.
Oh, 72. Okay, very cool.
Very solid movie.
It's very solid, and again, yeah, what it comes down to is very impressive to keep the viewer that engaged for that amount of time, and that's awesome to hear.
And believe me, you know,
72 is a very good score.
I saw that 3-hour runtime, and I was like, oh boy,
Get a little nervous.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Wow. Okay, 72, great score. Okay, so we're gonna keep on moving. We have his next film. We were in 2002, his biggest gap yet of 3 years. And we have Adam Sandler on deck. This is Punch Drunk Love.
Yes, a film that I was aware of, and this was a film that I've seen parts of because it's such a odd role for Adam Sandler. But I got to be honest, I was really not in love with this film. This is a film about a very awkward, maybe socially inept character that is frustrated by his family circumstances, trying to find love, and just overall, it's just like a mental breakdown of a film, honestly. Part of the reason why I included this, even with some of my sense of that I may not like it and what I've seen prior, is when I've heard this film described, I've always heard it described as a very stream of conscious rom-com. But both the romance and the comedy of that, I think both don't work. And part of it is how it's packaged. It's like a very awkward romance wrapped up in a suspense plot about anger issues, and it's just, I don't know.
So it's not much comedy and there's not much romance.
The comedy is, we'll get into Adam Sandler's performance. I think it is the highlight. If there is a highlight to the film, it is Sandler, and believe me, that's, you know me, that's high praise. We're giving high praise to Mark Wahlberg, and we're giving high praise to Adam Sandler.
Yeah.
That's new for me.
So, I will say the one interesting thing, as soon as we sat down here and said you watched this, was just like, ooh, like this is, again, we don't see him in a role quite like this often, and I'm almost like, how does he deal with the drama? Like, it's got weird comedy in it, and they have the drama, like any resemblance to his performance in Uncut Gems or something, you know what I mean?
Oh, certainly with the breakdown element, that's actually a great read, Tom. Yeah. And clearly, I think this movie shows or at least a little bit earlier on in his career, that he does have range.
Right. Which it's just not explored much.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. But the comedy of this is a little bit of a hard sell because it's very much poking fun at Adam Sandler's character until his character has these explosive rage moments that are defining his life for the story beats of it, and sold by the movie of, wow, Adam Sandler is freaking out on screen. And now, it is funny, but...
Oh, so it's comedy freakouts.
It's comedy freakouts.
Is it like Happy Gilmore when he freaks out? Or is it at least a little bit more serious or dark or weird? Like
definitely more darker.
Okay, so it is different freakout.
Yes. But of a similar vein that he's breaking glass or he's punching through a wall or, you know.
Right.
Yeah, he tears apart a restroom in the middle of a dinner for one point.
But still a more serious note regardless.
Yeah.
than a Happy Gilmore freak
Yeah,
out.
I think it's sold less effectively though because it's that rage, and it is funny to see him lose his shit on screen.
Right.
But it's just wrapped up in such a weird, frustrating package that is just, the film is so cruel to his character, and then his character is still presented in an empathetic way. It's wrapped up in a way that it feels like it's a mental breakdown of the character, especially with the music. The music is very high-strung. It's very anxiety-inducing, very artistic with its percussion.
But it doesn't work?
I don't think it works because if the film is trying to sell comedic moments, it really does come off more like a suspense romance, which is weird.
Yeah.
Yeah. And believe me, I like weird stuff. I think for me, though, the hard pill to swallow was that I was coming into this not a huge fan of Adam Sandler, and for the first half of the film, we don't get to those good freak-out moments. We are just seeing Adam Sandler's character get further and further frustrated with his circumstances and his family life and whatnot, and it's just kind of like uncomfortable to watch for that reason.
Huh, okay.
Certainly maybe a feather in PTA's cap for telling a story, once again, if he's trying to tell a story about that frustration, he's trying to communicate that. The movie is certainly effective as that. I can have that appreciation. I just don't think it was that enjoyable to watch, especially, again, where I'm coming at this for folks at home. If this is going to be billed as a rom-com, no less probably some people call this one of the best rom-coms. This is, I don't think that's a very misleading way to talk about it.
Okay, that's good. Definitely good to know going into it. Yeah.
Exactly. The comedy is a hard sell, like I said. Everyone's really just like a total weirdo. And it's just, I don't know. It's not that the scenes aren't funny. It's, again, the scenes can be funny, but then the music playing, it feels like, I don't know, like American Psycho or something like that. It's portrayed in such a mental breakdown, high-strung way. It's, I don't know, it's just an odd mashing. And I watched this movie in one of the first, I think it was either Hard 8 or this I did first this week. Yeah, this kind of set the tone wrong, which I'm so glad Boogie Nights, was just such a win in diving into these films.
For your sake, at least, for your week.
For my sake, absolutely. My sanity. My high-strung knowledge. Let's talk about Sanders a little bit. To my surprise, he really is pretty great. He has moments of rage that are story-serving. They are for his character arc of how he's dealing with rage and what are his triggers to have these, really freakouts. And I would say when that music is played back a little bit or toned back, when he's just kind of left to freak out on screen, it's both funny and compelling. So I will say, if you are a fan of Adam Sandler's work already, this might be a must-watch because it's showing that range very early on in his career, which clearly he has demonstrated in other times.
Yeah.
And he is enjoyable. He's playing a very particular type of character, but you can tell he's definitely putting a lot of effort into it, which is, if I had to levy criticism as why I don't like Sandler, is that a lot of his productions don't have effort behind it. So I have to give some praise that he is putting, some serious acting chops behind
Okay, very cool.
That was a highlight for me. Other than that, though, other than this being possibly a boundary-breaking role for his acting career, I really don't feel there's much to rave about with this film.
How was Philip Seymour Hoffman?
Minor. Such a minor character.
Oh, okay.
He has a freak out. He has a little bit of conflict. Technically, he's our main antagonist, but the conflict of the film is also like everyone's against, like the world's kind of against Sandler's character.
Okay.
I forget the character's name.
Okay.
But, so he's just one of many things frustrating him and driving him to this rage. And for that reason, because of that focus is always all angles inwards towards Adam Sandler's character, so much, I would say almost sole focus is on his character and not much on supporting cast. It really is his show here.
Okay.
So, and that's why, I want to make sure to focus on that for what this film is about. And very similarly, like with what I was kind of wrapping up on, if this film is going to be seen as a boundary-breaking role for him, fantastic. I mean, that's something to watch. For me, though, I don't feel there's a lot to rave about with that, and and again, that's a little bit some of my bias, a little bit some of my predisposition that I wasn't exactly craving to see him push his acting chops farther, and I definitely wasn't invested in the story for a couple different reasons of how it was presented to me.
Okay, sure.
How it was presented on screen. Especially in the second half, scenes are strung together in such a low-impact, fantastical way, very wish fulfillment thing. Yes, it's maybe cathartic to see, it's finally going right for this character, but it just felt so little stake, little impact, little conflict. Things get resolved so quickly. It was like, by the end of it, I was just like, okay, it was just not something I was raving about. For sure.
And it's kind of surprising. Again, I mean, not to like harp on time so much on this podcast, but it's just the fact of like, we just got done with over a 3-hour movie, and you saying how appropriate it was and how engaged you were, and here we are, like an hour and 35 minutes. That's all the film is. It's about an hour and a half, and the fact that at the end of it, you're just like, all right, okay, very good.
That's a great point because it's
kind of weird. And Hard Eight was only an hour and 40 minutes.
Yeah,
it's just weird.
Yeah, and granted, these two films are very different, but think they do share a critique in the sense that the conflict gets resolved too easily, and for that reason, the conflict almost you're left questioning as an audience. Okay, was it that big of a deal to begin with?
Right? Was it that worth it to invest my time into?
Exactly. Hour and 30 or not?
Right.
So.
Was there any note of cinematography separately that you had with this? Just because we share kind of cinematographers and everything like that. You loved it so much in Boogie Nights. So.
I liked it, and especially for his rage, those moments where he's freaking out, very enjoyable to watch and presented in creative ways. Again, I think the standout is a bathroom scene that he just goes in and he wrecks the bathroom. And I'm not trying to be too hard on him. And if the film is going to be like those freak out moments, that's fine. But again, nothing that could save it, the cinematography.
Okay,
nothing
sure.
that was really elevating how this frustrating story, intentionally frustrating story, it was being presented.
Gotcha,
so,
okay.
With that said, not coming out too hot with this one, and like much on the same note of Hard Eight, not really finding a huge reason to recommend this to you folks at home of going back and watching the filmography. I think this one, unfortunately, is a pass, despite being a standout role for Adam Sandler. We're going to go ahead and give Punch Drunk Love a 43.
Wow, 43, even lower than Hard Eight.
Yeah.
It's a little surprising, to be honest with you.
Yeah,
and it's funny because it is talked up quite a bit of, like you said, kind of being that rom-com and being a bit of a different style.
Misleading,
Yeah, that's interesting, and it's a good note that you've made though of just like, hey, if you're kind of following Sandler a little bit like that, maybe check it out for his sake, But otherwise, as far as storytelling is concerned, definitely maybe a bit of a pass at a 43.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I have people in my life that they consider Adam Sandler, their favorite, no less.
We grew up with him so much.
Yeah.
We really did grow up with his movies. So he's definitely a part of that a little bit. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So.
Okay, all right. Well, very good, Ben. So those were our 4 older films before we get on to our newly released kind of in theaters films. Again, we just want to take a time here and thank you producers who help produce this show. Vin and I host the show. We don't look at you as listeners. We look at you producers. And what you can do is you can go on thedailyratings.com. You can go to the donations tab. And through monetary donations, you guys help keep this going. We want to stay away from corporate sponsors and things like that. We don't want to just shill products that, you don't have to care about, or that honestly you're just going to skip fast forward through anyway. And, it's a direct through line to you all, because when you donate, you can write a note. We're going to read it on air when you donate. We'll give you a little shout out as well. And it creates a dialogue. It creates a dialogue with us to you. And it's kind of building something here. And it's fun. We are enjoying this, but it takes some time. It does take some money. And so any kickback from you all that you can give us, we greatly appreciate. Those of you who produce this and you get that producer credit, you were the most beautiful people to us. And, we just appreciate it so much. And we're all having a good time with this. So again, this It's dailyratings.com. You can head to the donations tab. And with that, now we're going to get on to our last Paul Thomas Anderson film, and it's going to be Licorice Pizza.
Yes, an odd name for it, but apparently attached to a real life store in the setting of this, which is in I think in the San Fernando Valley, very California type of thing. Licorice Pizza is this is a movie that is a through and through will they won't they type of romance, but it is wrapped up in a package in the vein of a Once Upon a Time in Hollywood type of story where we have a main story, but a lot of the runtime is dedicated to side plots that are introduced and resolved in the same sequence.
Okay.
Dips into the feel of the time, trying to sell the world. And I would say a standout here is some very cool casting here. We have...
I love the cast.
Yeah.
Love the cast.
Our main characters, we have Philip Seymour Hoffman's son in this. And the fact that...
I had no idea.
Yeah.
I honestly had no idea.
The fact that he's getting involved in acting and rekindling that relationship with clearly
cool.
one of the favorite actor-director combos in PTA's filmography and Paul Tamers, Philip Seymour Hoffman. Too many 3-word names. Just really Phil Bigger Hall.
It's too much work.
Lay it off. Cut one down. Trim the fat from me. I think it was very cool, and that as well. He's very charismatic on screen. I would like to see. I'm gonna kind of hold some of my praise because I would like to see what he will do with his career if he has the range of his father and the true fearlessness to play any type of character. Embarrassing, awkward, cool, or not.
Yeah.
I think there's some promising start. Also, our main actress. I'm forgetting her name.
Alana Haim.
Yes, I believe I think it's Haim. Yeah, a rookie star as well. But her family, including many sisters, are cast within the film. Her father is
cool.
actually in the film. So there's some really cool casting ideas here, and very enjoyable because it's sold very well. The dialogue works so well, and I think that's two sides of the main of the same coin. That the dialogue works well because of a very sharp script, but also because of a very natural approach to how these lines are delivered. And I think that lies in some really sharp casting on this film's part.
I can't wait to hear how Philip Seymour Hoffman's son was. How did he... I don't know, how did he keep the torch going?
Yeah, well, I mean, he's very young, and this film has a topic of... will they, won't they? Kind of a taboo love. Philip Seymour Hoffman's son, what is his name actually?
Cooper Hoffman.
There we go. If he's gonna survive on his own, we should probably
start giving him some praise. Yeah.
His own name. It's not on leash. I think it's a little bit hard because he is playing a very young character, a very kite in the wind type of character, just going from pleasure to pleasure, and then he is contrast by our main female lead, who is kind of an antagonist, but probably most controversial about this film. She is 25. It's actually alluded that she's maybe as old as 28 in the film, and he's only 15. So we have a little bit of an odd pill to swallow for this film.
Very much of a call me by your name type situation, yeah.
And I think I don't know for sure at the time of recording this, but I think there could be some flack put towards this film for that reason. I think why I'm leading this criticism or spotlighting what could be potential there for me specifically in watching this film. This is a early 70s love letter, like I said, very structurally similar to a Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, that it's side stories and then one plot line. Mm-hmm. It's just odd because I was kind of left scratching my head, especially in theaters. What is the demographic in this film? I had teenagers in the theater. I also had geriatric hospice patients. Did you know
they're hospice? Did you go up and ask?
How many
there
weeks?
You're there
How
with
many
your
weeks?
clipboard as it go.
How's it going? What's the element?
Yeah.
The demographics for this film is a little bit confusing because it is a sophomoric humor. It's very raunchy humor. Obviously, it's about kids, so it's going to be kind of funny in that way.
Right.
But it's wrapped up in this love letter of callbacks to waterbeds and callbacks to early 70s burnt orange and kind of things like it's very odd, the pairing that he did here.
So Paul Thomas Anderson, though, encapsulates that time period well.
Yes, the time period is done well. I think if I had to be critical and why I'm coming maybe a little bit more lukewarm with this film is I feel it's in conflict with the type of story, the type of characters we have on screen, and the dressings and the settings around them. I think it's a touch of a mismatch. That said, that's in the eye of the beholder. For me, it just didn't quite work.
Right.
I didn't feel like thematically as well it tied in.
So even in the set, so even the fact that you have very young coming of age love story in the 70s, even with that so you would expect raunchiness or something like that, but overall, the overall package, something was off. Even so, even with all that. You're saying something kind of didn't feel right.
Yeah, and it's how sophomoric some of the jokes are. That actually bleeds into some of the side stories as well. Some really, I would say, out of place jokes. It particularly landed in the theater that I was in, which I was happy.
Yeah.
There was a moment there, and a couple moments that I was like, oh, okay, we're really making this type of joke. Again, that's very much going to be subjective. I think most of the time it worked, even when the humor was coming off a bit racy, a bit crass. But I think they were done to sell the time period of the story. They were, again, it is this pocket look into this time period, and it's sold through these side stories. What I was in love with, though, is that as the main plot of our romance goes on and progresses, it becomes increasingly more shallow because the romance kind of boils down to a will they, won't they, a tit-for-tat, very juvenile romance. And that was not the most engaging, especially as the runtime went on. What I then was looking forward to are these side stories, and it really does help string things along. And for some of the cases, really are the best parts about the film, which is surprising. We have an appearance. How am I forgetting his name?
We have got Bradley Cooper, Tom Waits.
Tom Waits, yes.
Yeah, I love seeing Tom Waits pop up in film here and there.
I know.
Let him go bigger and bigger. I love it.
Yeah, he's clearly playing like a very particular type of character that, a very maverick director, doesn't give a crap about anything.
Right.
Yeah.
He fits, huh?
Yeah. He does a good job. And that's what I mean. As those side stories progress, they slowly become from you questioning why they're in the film in the first place to the best parts about the film to even further probably what saves the film for me as this relationship and the romance kind of it's one note. It's not bad, but it's all tit for tat, very juvenile, all right, I've been there, done that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so it didn't come as cutesy and heartwarming.
I think what prevents it from being heartwarming is the subject matter of she's 28, potentially 25, and he's 15.
Yeah,
I think, I don't know. I was definitely conflicted, and I think I bring this up. Well, it's not really a spoiler for one, and we can talk about it that way, but I bring this up especially for folks at home because if that maybe along the lines of, like you said, for Call Me By Your Name, if that was a factor that maybe prevents you from liking the film for really any number of reasons, that is definitely a factor here. I think a lot of it is sold well. Yeah, but it quickly is a factor in the beginning half of the movie, and then more and more it's just slowly forgotten. And if anything, I would have rather it's be the center point of the conflict in the romance rather than, oh, you're looking at her and, you're looking at him. It's very juvenile.
Okay, yeah.
So, for that reason, I think the goal of this film, and especially the follow-through of trying to tell a day-in-the-life story of early 70s, very burnt orange type of hue to life, I think it's charming and makes ugly likable.
Okay.
Our characters are not the most charismatic. They're not the most attractive on screen. And I think that's everyone.
I think that came across in the trailer and purposely done. And like
Yeah.
I was like, oh, well, these just look like normal ass people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if there was going to be a follow through of why early 70s, to my criticism of why are we telling this sophomoric story with a very old callback, I think it's because that timeline or that time period of early 70s, I think it encapsulates that feel of ugly but likable, ugly but heartwarming in some sort of way, maybe a little bit tacky in areas, but still something that we can all have fun with. In its subject matter, around the age, I think,
And not following, was this following any type of true story or something like that? Like a nugget of truth for actually something that happened? Or?
I think it was more so kind of a half-truth, kind of a non-fiction fiction of these, of maybe some historical characters in Hollywood in film production at the time, and try and dive into them. Again, I don't want to over-compare to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, because this film does have merits of its own, but it really is going for that type of genre, a pocket view of this time place.
Yeah, and it seems like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood was not so much a love letter, but it was an ode to old school Hollywood or the good elements of Hollywood to an extent. You know what I mean? Like Quentin Tarantino was definitely shining a light on something and trying to make it to a positive. This was more so just a little time capsule of yesteryear, kind of.
And maybe a suburb of that.
Right.
Less stakes, a little bit uglier, a little bit less polished, but that really is the point of the film.
Right.
And I think if almost saying that out loud, I think if there's a through line in this dive into the earlier works of PTA and why this is maybe a revival of that is he very clearly, through the script, through the vision, through the design of this film, has a feel and a mood in mind and executes upon that pretty flawlessly. It's follow through to pair all these things together. I think it's just, I could imagine this movie getting a little bit of a hate because of the age issue. I think it's sold because of maybe the kind of frisky time period. I mean, we go back to Boogie Nights,
the one thing about Call Me by Name is that the fact that this takes place in the 70s, I think more people are going to be a little bit looser. I think some people just will not see that film because of that, because the age difference and how it's how much it's frowned upon. The fact that it took place in the 70s, though, I think there's an easing of that grossness, I guess,
I agree.
Not that it's not there. The
it's certainly not there.
You were definitely noticing in the theater.
I think probably it's unavoidable to notice because it's very in the forefront in the beginning of the story, and then it just kind of goes away. And that's where I think my criticism is directed. I would have rather that let's put it in the forefront and let's make it the conflict.
Because it is conflict, actually. With us viewers.
Instead, the conflict just boils down to a will they, won't they, and that's where it's like, all right, well, it's enjoyable because of the side stories, but that middle part it kind of just rots away, which is a shame. And I think if you're going to keep my attention in a modern film, it has to have, especially if that main through line is going to be about the romance, there's got to be something fresh done with the romance. And there are fresh aspects, and you can say, well, it's a progression through the time period, and these side stories give more than just a spotlight to cool little side characters. They are spotlights to our main characters as well, and the situations that they're put into. I just think it just didn't hold up, and if anything, my compass for that is very much that these side stories quickly became a distraction from what I cared about in the main plot line to something that I very quickly thought was saving this film from being kind of bad, honestly.
Wow. Okay.
Or at least generic.
Sure.
But with that said, thank God there is a sharp script. I think there's a lot of praise to the casting here. And I'm not one to talk about casting too much. There's really a highlight here. The sharp script, the way the dialogue is driven through the film, once again, pacing a very big highlight, and these side stories are what's keeping this film in a positive light for me. We're going to go ahead and give Licorice Pizza a 66.
Oh, it's 66. Still pretty good score.
Yeah.
No, actually, that's very, I'm definitely still going to see it for sure. And even it being a 66, it's just like, yeah, okay, that's a good movie.
And I think it's worth your time. Take a look at these actors. They're clearly probably going to be in more of PTA's stuff, at least.
Real quick, as far as the up-and-comers, absolutely, yeah. That's cool that he took that and, like Cooper Hoffman and, like you said, family members and everything, very cool. And then the big actors, I'm excited to see, like, real quick, like Bradley Cooper and Sean Penn, like, how were they? Like, good?
Good. Bradley Cooper was a little bit annoying. If I'm being honest.
All right.
Sean Penn played a very particular type of actor, up his own ass kind of thing.
Right.
But that, honestly, by the time those side stories are introduced, those are the good side stories that I'm referring to. It's probably the better part about the film.
Cool. All right. Well, yes, 66, still a good film. Still worth checking it out and everything like that. And Vin, is there anything else here that you wish to add, or we're going to roll credits here?
No, I think that's good. I mean, I was happy to do this dive into the first half of PTA's career. Glad he's returning to maybe some of his roots. And, if anything we talked about here today, folks at home, isn't really jiving with you, understand that Paul Thomas Anderson has some of the sharpest films on the block, and the ones that we did not cover today. It's definitely worth paying attention to him as a director, because you never know when another There Will Be Blood will come out of the woodwork.
Yeah, and it's going to be fun as we do these podcasts and stuff, hitting some of those, that middle ground and everything like that, and some of his later work, because I love that you took his earlier work and that we're starting with that, and just the fact that it ties into the style of his 2021 film.
Oh,
yeah, it's just very cool. Yeah.
100%.
All right, Vin. Really appreciate you stopping by, folks. Here, we're just going to go through these films just one more time here. So we have Hard 8 at a 49%, Boogie Nights, the big film here, at an 85%, Magnolia with a 72%, Punch Drunk Love with a 43%, and Licorice Pizza with a 66%. Again, we thank you so much, folks, for tuning in, and we will see you next week on the Daily Ratings Podcast. If you enjoyed the podcast, if you would, give us a good rating, or tell a friend about us. If you're wondering if a film is worth a watch, or if you'd just like to see more movie ratings from Vince, be sure to stop by thedailyratings.com, where we have our ever-expanding catalog of films. Also, if you found value in the podcast or our site, become a producer and go to the donations tab on thedailyratings.com. You can donate whatever amount of value you feel you received from our product. You'll get a producer mention on the next podcast episode, too. We're looking to build this into something large and great, but also be independent from those corporate sponsors. So we greatly appreciate any support from you all. So thanks so much, and we'll see you next time on the Daily Ratings Podcast.